So selection, come on, tell us. Everyone wants to know what selection's like. I have a very vague idea because a friend of mine failed it. I listened to Ant Middleton's book, which I listened to that when I did my 999 miles run. And it was fascinating because when I was in the Corps, I wouldn't have considered special forces because I wasn't really fit. I wasn't that kind of guy. And of course, I'm listening to Ant's book thinking, my God, I could have done selection. If I had this mindset now, back then, I'd have not smashed selection because I don't think anybody does, but it would have been a consideration, right?
Yeah.
So,
I mean, probably the biggest challenge was getting on selection to start with. So at the time, the Marines were only allowing 4 bootnecks per course to go on. So we had to go through quite a lengthy process to get one of those 4 slots to go on. And there was actually 2. It was me and a good friend of mine, Paul.
How often do they do the selections?
2 a year. So there's only 2.
Wow.
Only 2 courses per year. So there's only 8 Marines, total per year could get on selection. So we had to, me and my friend Paul were both trying at the same time, both down at Pool serving together, and to get a place. And the problem being, obviously, where we were at the time, all our headship, our chain of command, were SBS. So we're having to go in front of like the Sergeant Major and the OC to say, look, we want to go on SAS selection. And the initial response from the Sergeant Major was, you want to be a Pongo, and it was a real difficult battle. And it was almost a war of attrition over a year where, me and my mate constantly going in and saying, look, we still want to go, on selection, and then eventually got put in front of the OC, and he was like, well, as a young 21-year-old Marine, what have you got to offer? The SAS, and, we're just trying to fight our case, and eventually got in front of the CO, and then got the paperwork signed off. And then the pair of us started in January 1992. We got onto selection there.
And how does it work? Because I think there's a lot of confusion about what is selection and what is training, or is training just becoming part of your SAS unit? How?
I mean, we kind of, the general view is that selection is the 6-month process.
6 months.
6 months. It's a 6-month course.
And you've got the hills phase.
Yeah, and the 3 major sort of blocks, if you like, of it are the hills phase, which is the first 4 weeks.
Which is here in the...
in the Brecon Beacons, So based around the Brecon Beacons, and also the Eland Valley and the Black Mountains, so using all that sort of area. Wow. Different marches, you start, it's progressive, so you start in groups where you get taught navigation. And just the marches get progressively more difficult. The weight increases.
You got taught navigation.
So you get taught map reading. So
you just have to know this.
They expect, obviously, a basic level, but there was 120, candidates on this course from all walks of the military. From people from across obviously all the army regiments. There was people from the RAF regiment on there. There's 4 of us from the Marines, and they assume a basic level of military knowledge, but I think as a safety thing, they just refresh everybody on map reading.
So talking of safety, what's your take on? Was it 3 soldiers died in one day, or 2?
Yeah, their deaths on the hills on the reserve selection. Yeah, I mean, a lot of it. I think it was freak weather conditions.
It was incredibly hot.
Yeah,
and 3 potential candidates for the SAS died of heat.
Heat-related injuries. Yeah,
and the controversy was kind of like, well, hang on, at training team, your SAS, you should know how to look after people, and hydration is obviously a big thing in our work. The other school of thought was, well, hang on, this is the SS, we don't make it easy for anybody.
I mean, the key thing is, as well, is that these guys they were civilians trying to join an SAS reserve unit. So they hadn't come from a military background. They didn't really have that sort of physical and mental sort of resilience that's built up from, a regular military career.
And probably to recognise the warning signs if I'm going down here, I need to put my hand up and say I need help, or
so they're less experienced in that respect.
How hard is it then, Lou? How much weight is in your pack when you your sort of average weight when you're doing
Yeah,
these
so
things?
it builds up throughout the course of the 4 weeks. And so you start in groups, fairly lightweight, and then it basically just moves on and the weight increases, the length of the marches and the terrain you're going over gradually gets more difficult. And then you get to a point where you're then doing the marches solo. And it's all about, self-discipline, because there's only you out there, and you get no encouragement or discouragement, from directing staff. They're purely there to.
Question for you then: do you? I think I know the answer to my own question. But when the staff are on these checkpoints and they're waiting for the boys to, come up these massive hills, carrying their burgans, sweating, with a weapons slung across their chest, or held in your hand, isn't it? I think.
Yeah.
Do you think the staff, they can listen to the response from that potential trooper and judge and tell a lot about their character?
Yeah, you're being assessed the whole time, and they'll be checking from a safety perspective, the condition you're in when you get to that checkpoint, because you do have a quick conversation, and they get you to confirm, where you are.
Are you best to just be polite, short, sharp, to the point? Yes, staff, I'm okay, staff. Yeah, I know my bearing.
Yeah.
Good. Okay, go.
Exactly.
Rather than be like, fucking hell, that was mega.
Yeah.
Really, I've got to do more.
It's all about it being, professional. You're there to do a job, and just as any soldier, being as professional as you can about it. So, but you have to be wary, and but you just don't get any feedback. So you don't actually know. Particularly, when you go to the jungle, as to how you're getting on, on what they think about your performance. So that's quite daunting.
And that's a very good mental technique in it, psychological technique in itself, isn't it? It's like you've got to believe in yourself.
Yeah, absolutely.
You're doing the right thing. Just keep going. Don't, because when they do that to you, your first thing is, I'm not good enough. Maybe I should give up.
Yeah, it's easy for self-doubt, to creep in. And again, they're just looking for that, that self-discipline.
How tall are you?
6 foot.
Oh, okay. So, but you're sort of fairly slight of build.
Yeah. Just
did you?
slim build.
But 6 foot, that puts you at a good height for speed marching and.
Yeah, pretty long legs always helps. So
because I struggled so much with that.
Did you? Yeah.
Short people,
Yeah.
And also, I think I was about 9.5 stone when I joined, so I'm carrying the same burden or kit as a guy that's, some guys were not twice my weight, but not far. There were 16 stone guys, big 6'7" guys. So I had to carry the same weight as them.
Yeah.
Again, is a reason why I probably wouldn't have considered doing the special ops things. It just wasn't.
But you do find guys of all kinds of build and size and shape.
And Middleton says in his book, he really struggled in his time in the Paras, because we were in the Paras and the Marines and the SAS, just like yourself.
Yeah.
And he said he struggled with the tabbing in the Paras. He obviously got through selection.
Yeah. No, and a lot of it is your mental approach to it, and if you've got the right mental attitude and determination.
Was it a culture shock being dealt with by Army instead of?
It was,
Navy.
All the lingo, So obviously the Marines have got completely their own language, wets and scram and all that kind of stuff, and to go to bruise and scoff, it was quite. It took me a little bit of time to get used to the different lingo and just and the SS is very different to being the Marines. It was I guess a much more grown up approach, and you do feel like you're it's much smaller, so you get to know everyone pretty quickly.
So do you know Mark Billingham then, Billy?
Yeah, he was on my selection, so we were on the same selection together. He was so obviously he came from the parachute regiment, but he was one of the 120 that started on.
He just seemed like a really nice guy.
He's great, yeah. We got on great, Billy, and he was. There was only 10 of us finished that course from 120. There was 10 successfully finished, and Billy was one of them as well. So
he's done some things with his life, hasn't he?
He's been a busy boy, yeah, absolutely. So now doing some amazing stuff. So and he still lives in the Hereford area, so I bump into him now and again as well. So
brilliant.
Yeah.
Right. Okay, so we're on selection. How was your yomping or tabbing as they call it?
Yeah, it was hard. I mean, the final phase of the 4 weeks on the hills is test week, and they're all solo marches of increasing difficulty. And the final march, endurance, it's way over 40 odd miles, and you're out there for 20 odd hours, through the night as well, on your own, navigating through like all weather conditions, to complete that march. And I was pretty exhausted. And this word endurance, we'll talk about, I've just written a book titled Endurance.
Yes, we'll talk about your book, definitely.
And the reason I titled the book Endurance is this word endurance just seems to have featured so heavily in my life, right from, a young age. There was examples of it in my childhood, but then during the Marines, you got the endurance course, the run across Woodbury Common through the tunnels and the pipes, so you got the endurance course. Then I did SAS selection, you had the endurance march. And they say, don't they, that the body kind of gives up, or your mind, gives up when the body is at about 40% capacity, so it's that's where the real mental game kicks in, when your body's hurting and it's telling you to kind of stop. I think if you understand that actually really physically you're probably only at about 40% of your capacity, and that your mind can then take you much further. And I think the more you do that, throughout your life, I think it needs to be progressive, building up. And I guess take yourself out of your comfort zone. The more regularly you do that, you just expand your sort of comfort zone all the time. I think that's kind of what's happened to me with it when it comes to endurance. Throughout my life, started sort of small, doing small challenges and sort of low level expeditions, and getting a little bit out of my comfort zone at the end of those, and think, right, the next one actually, I could do a bit more. I could do this unsupported this time. And just, keep expanding and pushing that comfort zone all the time until suddenly your comfort zone might have been like that size when you first started doing this stuff. And then all of a sudden, it's way bigger, and you can just push things further.
A bit like a sort of muscle, body, memory, all rolled into one. Can you tell us about the is it called the interrogation phase?
Yeah, the combat. It's called combat survival, or SEER at the time. Survive, evade, resist, escape sort of package. I had one there's lots of bits I remember from it, but there was one bit where I was getting interviewed or interrogated, if you like, and the guy was like Mr. Angry, and he was sat opposite me, this desk, and he had a cup of soup on the table, and there was like these crispy crouton things floating on the top of it. And his technique, what he was doing, he was taking a mouthful of this cup of soup and then like shouting and bawling at me, and ended up like spitting most of this like cup of soup all over my face. And I can remember being sat there and obviously starving, hadn't eaten anything for like days, and you could feel these crispy croutons dotted around. So while he was like shouting away at me, I was trying to get my tongue and like grab them and hook them into my mouth and eat them. And he spotted what I was doing. He was like, "Oh, stop doing that!" And wiped them off my face, So pretty gross, but it was food.
What was the hardest part then for you of that 6? Was there
the jungle? Yeah, I think most people find, because it's 6 weeks, in the jungle, you're pretty much, fully tactical the whole time. You've got a DS.
What do you sleep in? Is it
hammocks? So you sleep in a hammock. You'll be patrolling, whatever you're doing, military activity all through the day, and then you string up a hammock at night. And the routine of getting out of your wet, sweat-soaked clothing at the end of the day. Putting on your dry kit, getting into your hammock, and probably the worst part of it is the morning. So you get up before it gets light for stand 2, and you have to get out of this nice dry clothing and put on this soaking wet, stinking.
I'll tell you who covers this really well is Ray Mears.
Okay,
when he does his jungle expeditions and he shows how he puts his hammock up, puts his tarp over the top.
Yeah.
He's like, now I'm dry clothes because I'm going to go to sleep, and in the morning it's wet clothes.
Yeah,
it's one of those things. I mean, the similar situation when I did my run is I was in catch-22. If I wore a waterproof with anything underneath, that just becomes soaked in sweat. In seconds.
Yeah.
So up there in the mountains in the Highlands of Scotland, it was forecast to be -1 one night, even though I was running it was late September. And you have to make that tactical decision. Well, I don't want wet clothes because how will I dry them? I need something for emergency just in case something goes tits up. So I just put a cold, wet, waterproof on, and you're shivering, and initially you've got to get yourself going. And it's just being that strict with yourself.
Yeah, it is. It's all self-discipline, and you'd be surprised. You wouldn't think you'd be shivering and freezing cold in the jungle, but every morning, before the sun came up, laid there in that wet clothing, in your sort of stand-to position, waiting, for that first half hour of the first light to get moving and generate some heat. It was,
I'm guessing we won't move on to Antarctica just yet, but this is all learning for you, isn't it?
It is.
And getting your mind in the right place and
Absolutely.
learning how to do your admin.
Yeah.
Are you, when you're in your tent, are you a sort of tidy?
Oh, yeah. Methodical.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Almost to the
Are
point
you like that at home?
Yeah, a little bit. Yeah, I am like naturally a really tidy person. Everything has to be in its place. And routine is key to, Antarctic when we get onto it. The blocks of routine and doing things in a methodical order are absolutely critical. And even, people with no military background, adopt these blocks of routine to ultimately be able to, progress, long distances across the continent. So.